The story begins at the shore of the sea in Malaysia, where some children are playing badminton on the beach with rackets they have made with their own hands. This shows that they are very poor and can't afford to buy proper badminton rackets. Among these children is a boy named Lee Chong. Just then, Lee's father arrives, and seeing him, Lee becomes afraid. The reason is that Lee's father doesn't want him to play badminton because learning and playing this game costs a lot of money. He wants Lee to focus on his studies and become a government officer. He brings Lee home, where Lee eats dinner with his mom, dad, his two brothers, and his sister. Lee's dad says, "You all need to focus on your studies and stay away from sports. Today, there's an Olympic badminton match between Malaysia and Korea." Lee's parents want to go watch the match because they don't have a TV at home. They tell their kids to stay home and study while they go. But Lee really wants to watch the match too. So after his parents leave, he sneaks out on his bicycle and heads to the same place where they went to watch. There's a huge crowd there, and since Lee is short, he can't see. Luckily, his brother, who is already there, lifts him onto his shoulders so Lee can watch the game. Lee gets super excited watching the match. He sees how passionate the crowd is about these players, and he dreams of becoming a badminton player himself, because he loves the game. However, Malaysia loses the match, and his dad catches sight of both of his sons in the crowd. Lee tells his dad that one day he will become a great badminton player. But his dad brushes it off, saying badminton is a sport for the rich, and Lee should focus on his studies instead of wasting time on games. However, Lee silently makes up his mind that one day he will become a great badminton player, though he has no idea how he'll get there. The next day at school, Lee sees two kids playing badminton. He wants to join them, but he doesn't have a racket or any other equipment, so the kids don't let him play. On his way home, Lee always passes by a sports shop, and today, he decides to go inside. The shop owner is there, and Lee carefully looks at every piece of equipment, but he can't buy anything because he doesn't have money. The shop owner notices this and understands the situation. He offers Lee a deal, saying, "If you string the badminton rackets for me, I'll pay you." But Lee responds, "I don't want money. Instead, for every 5 rackets I string, I want a shuttlecock." The shopkeeper is surprised by his request but agrees to it. For the first time in his life, Lee finally has his own shuttlecock. He plays with his friend at home, but since he still doesn't have a racket, he plays with it using a pan with his friend. He practices all the time, which causes his grades to drop significantly. Instead of going home from the school, he heads to a nearby academy, where many kids his age are playing badminton matches. Lee wants to join them, but he still doesn't have a racket. The shopkeeper, who is there as well because he used to be a badminton player himself, notices Lee looking sad, so he hands Lee his own racket. Lee joins a match with one of the kids, but at first, he's unsure of how to hit the shots. However, after closely watching the other kids play, he starts to understand. Lee performs exceptionally well and ends up defeating his opponent. He even wins a trophy, and the shopkeeper gives him the racket he used in the match as a gift. For the first time, Lee has his very own racket. There is also a coach present at the academy, who is impressed by Lee's performance. The coach decides to accompany Lee back to his home. When they arrive, Lee's father is there, already furious because of Lee's poor grades. In anger, his father breaks the racket in Lee's hands and says, "You are never to play again after today." The coach tries to reason with Lee's father, explaining that his son has great talent and a bright future in badminton. But Lee's father refuses to listen. The coach also speaks with Lee's mother, but she feels powerless to help. In the end, the coach leaves reluctantly. It turns out the coach is actually a friend of the shopkeeper, who had given Lee the racket. That night, while Lee is sleeping, his mom brings him the trophy he won earlier in the match. This shows that she secretly supports his passion for badminton. The next day, Lee goes to the shopkeeper's store, where the shopkeeper tells him, "We're organizing a charity match, and I want you to play." Lee agrees and follows him to the match location. However, it's not a charity match at all. Here, 2 players compete while the rest of the people bet on who will win or lose. Lee has no idea about the betting. At first, Lee doesn't perform well, but soon finds his rhythm and plays some excellent shots, and wins the match. After the win, the shopkeeper gives him a trophy to keep him unaware of the betting. The shopkeeper brings Lee back to the same place every day to play matches, and Lee continues winning trophies. He often returns home late, and he hides all the trophies he wins. One day, Lee's father discovers the hidden trophies. Concerned, he sets out to find his son and he learns that Lee has been going to a place where illegal betting on badminton matches happens. Furious, he rushes to the location and confronts the gangster who runs the operation. This gangster recognizes Lee's father. Years ago, Lee's father used to play there with his friend and was a talented player. One day, the gangster asked them to fix a match because a large sum of money was riding on it, but Lee's father and his friend refused. As a result, the gangster suffered a big financial loss and sent his men after them. While Lee's father managed to escape, his friend was killed by the gangster's men. Since then, Lee's father swore never to return to that place, which is why he didn't want his children involved in badminton. Now, back at the scene, the gangster tells Lee's father, "If you want to leave here alive with your son, you'll have to play a doubles match." For the first time, Lee and his father play a match together. Lee performs exceptionally well, and his father is astonished by his talent. Together, they win the match. Afterward, Lee's father tells him, "I don't like losing, and I love gold medals." This is his way of finally giving Lee permission to pursue his dream and get proper training. Lee starts attending the academy, where the coach begins training him. There are other players at the academy, all older and more experienced than Lee. While Lee doesn't do well in the physical exercises, he excels at the game itself. One day, a committee arrives at the academy for the national team selection. They watch Lee's performance, which is outstanding, but they don't select him because of his short height. Lee's mom breaks the news to him, and he responds, "It's okay, I'll keep working hard." Determined, Lee starts doing everything possible to increase his height. He sleeps on time, wakes up early, and diligently performs every exercise. He also takes great care with his diet. After a few years, Lee's height finally increases. When the selection committee returns to the academy, Lee showcases his skills again. However, during the tryouts, he injures his knee and has to sit down in pain. Despite the setback, Lee doesn't give up and gets back up to continue playing. Although his performance suffers due to the injury, the committee is impressed by his courage and determination. They decide to give him a chance, and Lee is selected for the Malaysian Badminton Academy. When his family hears the news, they are overjoyed. Lee's father tells him, "Not everyone gets this opportunity. You must make our country proud." Lee arrives at the academy, where all the players are at the national level, players he had only seen on television before. Now, he has to exercise and practice alongside them, which feels like a huge achievement for him. However, he still struggles with the exercises, and this leads to him being bullied by some of the players, especially a boy named Zhang, who is an excellent player. One day, Zhang challenges Lee to a match with the condition that the loser has to clean the toilets. Lee accepts, but he loses the match. The coach watches everything from a distance and later calls Lee to his office. The coach points out that every other player's performance has improved, but Lee's game remains the same. The coach reminds him, "Never forget where you come from. People have high expectations for you, especially your mom." Motivated by the coach's words, Lee makes up his mind to work even harder. At night, while all the other players are asleep, Lee sneaks out to the court to practice alone. He also starts taking his exercises seriously and eating properly, determined to prove himself. At the academy, there's a girl named Julia, and Lee has a crush on her. Julia also likes him, and soon they become friends. But Zhang, the boy who defeated Lee earlier, also has feelings for Julia. Soon, all the students at the academy are being taken to a tournament. Initially, Lee's name is on the list, but at the last moment, it's removed. He is told that his knee injury hasn't fully recovered yet. This breaks Lee's heart, and he feels deeply disappointed. After this, he returns home, where his mom comforts him. Seeking some guidance, Lee goes to meet his old coach, who had trained him from childhood. When he arrives, he sees the coach training a man who is disrespecting him. Lee doesn't like this at all, so he challenges the man to a match. But the man dismisses Lee, saying, "I don't play with kids like you." Lee retorts, "That's because you can't play." This provokes the man, and they start a match. Lee defeats him easily in the first game. The man asks, "Who are you?" And Lee simply says, "You'll find out soon." Meanwhile, the team that had gone to the tournament returns victorious, and everyone is ecstatic. The coach then announces that Lee will play a practice match with Zhang. However, shortly after the match begins, Lee starts feeling pain in his knee again. The coach realizes that Lee hasn't given his knee enough rest, so he stops the game. To add to Lee's troubles, his relationship with Julia also falls apart, and they break up. At this point, Nothing seems to be going right in Lee's life. One day, while he is running, he gets told that the coach's wife is calling him. He goes to the coach's wife, where she tells him, "We had a son who looked just like you." The coach wanted him to become a badminton player, but he took too much pressure on himself, which is why he took his own life. That's why the coach doesn't want you to feel pressured, and that's the reason he didn't take you along for the tournament. Lee finally understands everything and becomes even more determined in his practice. He starts spending more time with the coach, and his game improves significantly. In 2004, Lee is selected for the Thomas Cup for the first time, where he performs well and makes it to the semi-final. However, he loses the semi-final match and is completely devastated. The coach comforts him and explains to him, "You should never fear losing. Losing is a stage that you need to overcome, and winning and losing are part of the game." With renewed determination, Lee then starts practicing even harder. In 2006, he plays in the Malaysia Cup, where he reaches the finals, but again, he loses the final match. Now, the selection committee believes that Lee cannot handle the pressure of the finals and decides to give another player a chance. However, the coach believes in Lee and explains to everyone that they should give Lee one more chance. Lee feels utterly defeated, but his coach encourages him to practice again. 6 months later, another tournament happens, which Lee loses. Now, both he and the coach get expelled from the academy. Lee is convinced that his career is over, but the coach tells him, "Your career is not over yet. I am sure you will do something great in life. Go back to your village and see from where you have come." After that, Lee returns to his village. First, he meets with his coach, who offers him encouragement. Then he goes to see his father, who tells him, "At the place you stand today, I once stood as well, but I had no one to guide me. However, we are with you now." After that, his father shows him the trophy they won for the first time in their lives. This boosts Lee's self-confidence. Lee goes back to training, where he starts running and playing again. In 2007, another tournament happens, and the boy who was selected for this tournament gets injured. Therefore, it is decided to send Lee in his place. He performs exceptionally well and wins the match. He wins one after another match and reaches the finals. Now he reaches the final match, and the player he faces has previously defeated Lee twice in the semi-final. Lee feels a lot of pressure because the entire nation of Malaysia is watching. No one has ever won this tournament for Malaysia before, and this might be his last chance. The match begins between the two players. Lee performs very well initially, but gradually, his performance starts to decline. At one moment, he falls on the court, and he suddenly remembers the faces of his father and his old coach. He realizes how much everyone expects from him. Julia is also there, cheering him on. He looks back, and Julia says, "I believe in you. You can do it." Now, Lee starts to play with renewed energy, scoring point after point. And finally, he executes an incredible shot that his opponent cannot return. With that shot, he wins the tournament, bringing home the first cup for Malaysia. Lee has finally defeated his longtime rival, the player who has beaten him in many matches over the years. Julia comes to Lee and hugs him tightly, celebrating his victory. At that moment, Lee has accomplished what he has always dreamed of achieving. This is the true story of Lee Chong Wei's life. We hope you enjoyed this motivational story.